Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to this joint SIP-IAIS event on providing public background on the draft application paper on the supervision of climate-related risks in the insurance sector. My name is Hannah van Voorde from the IAIS Secretariat, and I'm happy to welcome you to this call. I will start off with a couple of operational items before handing over to Peter Colhagen from one of the co-chairs for developing this paper. First of all, it's important to note that all attendees are in listen-only mode, and you will be able to see the presentation on the WebEx screen. And you will be able to share any questions or comments that you have via the chat function, and we'll respond to them during the event. The event will be recorded, and the recording will be published on both the IAIS and SIP websites after the event. And anyone who's connecting only by phone and who is not able to see the presentations while we go through the session, we'll be able to download it from the IAIS website. At this stage, I'm happy to hand over to Peter. Peter, you are on mute.
Yes. There we go. Thanks, Hannah, and it's my distinct pleasure to be able to welcome everyone here tonight, or today, or this morning, whichever it happens to be for you where you are in the world. My name is Peter Colhagen. I'm from the Australian Prudential Regulation Authority, and I'm one of the co-chairs that has been leading the drafting group that's produced the paper that we're here to talk about. Just a few brief comments on the agenda and how the session will run tonight or today. First, we're going to hear some brief introductory remarks from Jeff Summerhays, who's the chair of the Sustainable Insurance Forum and a member of the IAIS Executive Committee. We'll then talk about some of the background to the development of the paper and spend some time talking in a reasonable amount of detail about the core sections in the paper. We'll have time for questions and answers throughout that process, and then we'll hear some closing remarks from Connor Donaldson, who's the head of implementation at the IAIS, who will talk to us also about the next steps in the consultation process. With that said, I'll pass over to Jeff to make his introductory remarks.
Well, thank you, Peter, and hello, everybody. And on behalf of the global standard-setting body for insurance, the International Association of Insurance Supervisors, and the UN Environment Programme Sustainable Insurance Forum, a very warm welcome and thank you for joining this call. Climate change is a global challenge. It goes beyond any one sector of the economy or individual region of the world. It's the defining challenge for the global community this century. And insurance has both a critical and influential position in society's response to this challenge. Climate change is also a threat to the IAIS's mandate of financial stability and to maintain fair, safe and stable insurance markets. It is with this context that we have published an application paper on the supervision of climate-related risks to the insurance sector. It's the first such guidance by any international standard-setting body. I ask for your engagement, feedback and help in the form of the submission to this consultation process that we are announcing today, so that we can collectively shape this important and influential document. I'll now ask Peter and Emmanuel to give an outline of the application paper, and then Connor will provide you with some advice on how you can give your input to this process. Peter, with that, I'll hand back to you.
Thanks, Jeff. So we'll now move on and talk a little bit about the background to the paper, starting with a little bit of context about the Sustainable Insurance Forum and the IAIS. So as Jeff noted, this paper is being developed as a joint product between the Sustainable Insurance Forum and IAIS, and it fits very neatly into the mandate of both of those organisations. So the Sustainable Insurance Forum is a global network of insurance supervisors and regulators that work together to develop responses to sustainability challenges facing the insurance sector. It has over 30 jurisdictions as members from all over the world, and it provides a platform for those organisations to share information, build capability within their organisations, and as in the case of this paper, to support policy development. If we turn to the next slide, the IAIS is the international standard setting body for insurance, and it develops principles, standards, and supervisory material to help in the supervision of the insurance sector on a global level. So the IAIS has more than 200 members from 130 jurisdictions. And as Jeff touched on, its mission goes to the promoting safe and sound supervision of insurers and protecting policyholders and global financial stability. So we're here tonight or today talking about an application paper, and it's relevant to spend a little bit of time talking about where application papers sit in the hierarchy of materials that the IAIS issues. So the IAIS issues insurance core principles, which include the common framework for the supervision of internationally active insurance groups, and they establish standards and guidance focusing on the effective supervision of insurers. The supporting material to the insurance core principles includes application papers like the one we're here talking about, which provide additional material related to one or more of the ICPs or ComFrame principles to help provide practical application and guidance for how the ICPs can be implemented. They provide recommendations and examples of good practice to supervisors on implementation of the ICPs, but they don't of themselves create new standards. And the IAIS also issues issues papers, which provide background on topics, describe current practices, and we'll hear shortly about previous issues papers issued by the IAIS and CIF in partnership. One key point to note about application papers is that they should be read in the context of the proportionality principle, which is described in the introduction to the ICPs, and that supervisors have the flexibility to tailor the implementation of supervisory requirements and their application of insurance supervision to achieve the outcomes stipulated in the principal statements and standards. So the idea that everything in the application paper should be read in the context of being implemented appropriately for the size and risk of the particular insurer. I'll now pass over to my co-chair, Emmanuel Rocher from the ACPR, to take us through the next section of background on the paper.
Thanks, Peter. Hi to everyone. So I just wanted to start by saying that this draft application paper on the supervision of climate-related risk in the insurance sector has been jointly developed by members of the SIF and the IAIS since the end of 2019. So it follows two different previous joint publications by these two institutions. The first one in 2018 was an issues paper on the possible impact of climate change risk on the insurance sector, and the second one was published earlier this year in 2020. And this issues paper was on the implementation of the TCFD recommendations. So this application paper received the inputs from both the SIF and the IAIS members, committed to facilitate the transition towards low carbon economies and to enhance the role of insurers along this path. So we try to be as concrete and pragmatic as possible by incorporating some good practices and some examples coming from the various jurisdictions which are members of the SIS and IAIS networks. In June this year, we organized our first stakeholder webinar to gather feedback on the proposed scope and outline of the paper. So this time, as said by Jeff, the paper has been finalized, and we have just started to launch the public consultation process, which actually started in October, on October 13th this year. So we may go to the next slide. So as said by Peter, the aim of this application paper is to support supervisors in their efforts to integrate climate-related risk into the supervision. It provides background and guidance on how the IAIS supervisory material can be used to manage the challenges and opportunities raised by climate change risks. As previously said, the objective of the paper is not to establish new standards, but instead it provides additional guidance to assist implementation and provides examples of good practices from our members based on the different examples we obtain through our networks. So this implementation paper is intended to give an insight into the different ways climate-related risks may be incorporated within the corporate governance system and internal risk management. So naturally, climate-related risks may affect the supervision of these risks through many ways. But for the purpose of focusing the paper, we have decided to focus the content of the paper on specific ICPs, which are listed in this slide. So the main issue that we have tackled through the application paper are the following. So in particular, we have tackled the supervisory review and reporting, which is the ICP 9, corporate governance, ICP 7, the risk management and internal controls, the enterprise risk management for solvency purposes, the investment policies and procedures, and lastly, all the disclosure issues. We will have a deeper look in the next slide on the different recommendations issued for each section. So I won't develop at this stage. What I just wanted to add is that the SIF and the IAIS do recognize that several ICPs would have been of relevance for the scope of the paper, but they were not taken into account at this stage. We consider that they would be certainly in the future be covered in future work. We also wanted to point out that understanding the challenges and opportunities of climate-related risks is naturally an iterative and dynamic process, and the guidance provided here will naturally have to evolve and adapt progressively. So this is not naturally a definitive work. Next slide, please. So we may go to the next slide. Yes, thank you. So I think that now we can say that climate change and climate-related risks are now considered as a part of the financial risk. They have an impact on the resilience of individual financial institutions, like insurance in particular, but also on the financial stability. Insurers may be affected through the conjunction of three main areas of risk, which are on the slide. So the physical risk, the transition risk, and liability risk, where you can find in the slide the different definitions we have used in the paper. We started from the principle to think that climate-related risks are not considered from our point of view as a specific category of risk, but they may translate into the prudential risk through the existing category of risk, such as, for instance, for the insurance sector, the natural catastrophe risk, liability risk, the market risk in particular. So I will stop there, and then I will pass the floor to Peter to continue on this paper.
So I think we will we'll pause here for an opportunity to ask any questions. So there's one that has been passed through the chat function that we can start with. It's the paper relevant to only to internationally active insurance groups or to all insurers. The paper is very much developed to be relevant for all insurers. There are particular pieces that we will emphasise around internationally active insurance groups, but for the most part, the paper provides useful guidance to supervisors of all insurers. So it seems like that's the only question that's come through so far, but we'll just wait for perhaps another minute and see if anyone else has a question.
Peter, can I perhaps help out by asking, you talked about some of the topics that we didn't include. You know, what was the rationale behind not including some of those focus areas, and is there an opportunity to come back and look at those at a future stage?
Did you want to take that one, Emmanuel? Yes, perhaps as implicitly said by Jeff. In particular, we did not take into account the quantitative aspects of the issue. Naturally, that relates to the impact of climate-related risks to the financial position of insurers, and the way we could take this into account in a prudential supervision. And at this stage, we consider that we don't have a definitive view on the assessment methodology of the risk, and we consider it was a little bit too premature at this stage to have definitive view on the way we could tackle this issue. So we focus the paper on which is more on the corporate governance and internal control. So, and disclosures, but I think probably that we will tackle the issue of the quantitative aspects for the supervision of risk a bit later. Peter, I don't know if I can say much about the calendar and then the next steps we could consider at this stage, because I think we need some more time, but it's still a bit early at this stage to communicate on this.
Thank you.
I think I would just add to that you know, the submissions on the paper that people provide might be helpful in you know, helping us understand the need for further guidance on some of these other aspects. We have a question in the chat box about liability risk, and you know, does it you know, how do we think about liability risk, given that it seems a little bit more theoretical in nature compared to the other two? I think the paper very much intends to cover off all three of the risk channels here. I think it's probably, you know, it's easier to map directly through the physical and transitional risks to particular parts of the ICPs, but the liability risk is an emerging area, and various CIF members have made observations about how that's potentially playing out in their own jurisdictions. Okay. So we might move on to the specific sections of the application paper now. Is that okay, Hannah?
Yes, that is okay. Let's move on to slide 12 then. And there will be further opportunity for questions on different topics after we have discussed the topics. So please feel free to send in your questions, and we will take them at the end of the presentation.
Thanks, Anna, and that's right. So Emmanuel and I will run through the core sections of the paper now, and then we'll have time again to pause for questions when we get to the end of that section. So we'll start with supervisory review and reporting, which is covered by ICP 9. So the paper recommends supervisors assess the extent to which climate-related risks are likely to be material to insurers operating in their jurisdiction, and think about how those risks can be transmitted to their economies and financial sectors more broadly. So supervisors need to identify how climate-related risks are relevant to their supervisory objectives. And we've talked about how climate risk is a financial risk and is relevant to the mandate of the IAIS. And similarly, many jurisdictional supervisors have mandates that relate to protection of policyholders and promotion of financial stability, which can clearly be impacted by financial risks relating to climate change. The supervisor, to be able to do that effectively, will need to devote sufficient resources to allow effective supervision of the risks. And particularly in relation to a rapidly evolving risk like this one, the role of providing appropriate and adequate training opportunities for staff is of critical importance. The paper talks about some of the different approaches that supervisors are taking to embedding climate risk into the organisation of the supervisor, and that depends quite significantly on the particular jurisdictional circumstances of that supervisor. The paper talks about how to make a full and proper assessment of the risks. Supervisors need to have both qualitative information on risk management and governance approaches to climate-related risks, as well as appropriate quantitative information about the exposures of insurers to physical, transition and liability risks. And the paper provides some concrete examples from different CIF and IAIS member jurisdictions about some of the appropriate qualitative and quantitative indicators that can be used to help support their assessment. As it relates particularly to the supervision of insurance groups, information sharing and cooperation with other involved supervisors on climate-related risks is critical, and that can take place through existing mechanisms under the IAIS principles, such as colleges and the multilateral memorandum of understanding. And finally, on this point, again, given the rapid evolution of climate risk and the evolution of mechanisms and approaches to managing it, the paper talks about the importance of clear two-way communication between the supervisor and insurers to be able to make sure that there's opportunities for building shared understanding and learning about the risk as it evolves. I think with that, Emmanuel will move on to corporate governance and ICP 7.
Yeah, okay. Yes, so on corporate governance, given that climate risk is an evolving risk area, the relevant roles and responsibilities of the board, the senior management and control functions should continue to adapt. So this includes the need to have greater clarity on information and reporting needs, the resourcing, the skills and budgets. By assigning responsibility, there is greater accountability for mapping, controlling, monitoring these risks. So insurers should incorporate and assess climate risk as part of the annual financial planning and as part of the long and short-term strategic planning processes. The board has a specific and key role to play in maintaining an effective oversight of climate-related risk management, including incorporating climate-related dimensions into the insurer's risk appetite, strategies, and business plans. The board should rely on the senior management to provide advice on the organizational objectives, plans, strategic options, and policies as they relate to climate risk, including the establishment of adequate tools and methods, metrics, models to monitor the exposure towards climate risks. Finally, we thought that a remuneration policy can be used as an incentive to integrate climate-related risks in the risk management framework. Then we could have a look on the next section, which is about the risk management and internal controls. So this section of the paper provides guidance on how supervisors could integrate climate-related risks into their supervisory expectations around the risk management system and for each of the control functions, which is to say the risk management, internal audit, compliance, and the actuarial function. When addressing the climate-related risk, it is expected that insurers fully integrate these risks into the system of corporate governance, which includes the risk management and internal controls itself. So it is in particular recommended that insurers still using an approach that mainly addresses climate change from a reputational risk perspective, that they make a transition towards a more complex and more integrating approach to this risk and to consider it more holistically. In performing its duties, control functions should take proper consideration of climate-related risk and should have the appropriate resources, the skills, and expertise to support this objective. For some insurers, there may be a need to enhance the existing training programs. The control functions should identify, measure, and report on the insurer's risk, assess the effectiveness of the insurer risk management and internal controls, and determine whether the insurer's operations, the results, and climate risk exposure are consistent with the risk appetite which has been previously adopted by the board. Given the potential impact of climate-related risk on an insurer's solvency position, it would be expected that there are considered within the existing categories of risk and lead to a full review of the risk management framework in case of material change in this risk. This is particularly the case when it comes to the investment and underwriting policies. This means in particular that the insurer should consider and document in the existing risk management policies and procedures how climate risks could materialize within each area of the risk management system. Another key development in the application paper relates to the question of the outsourcing. Insurers that decide to outsource any material activity should ensure their ability to manage these risks and to ensure the continuity of their activities in case of a failure coming from the outsourcing provider. For instance, physical risk may affect the business continuity and may affect the premises of the outsourcing provider. So it means that business continuity plans should take into account the risk of climate change, and the business continuity plan should be adapted as consequently. Then we can move to the next session, and I give you the floor, Peter.
Thanks, Emmanuel. So the next section of the paper that we'll cover is around enterprise risk management for solvency purposes, which is dealt with under ICP 16. So physical, transitional and liability risks arising from climate change can have an impact on the risk profile, the underwriting strategy and processes of insurers. And so when material, supervisors should expect insurers to identify the relevant risks inherent in the business portfolios, assess the implications for the underwriting strategy, and develop policies and procedures to integrate the management of these risks as part of their ERM framework, as well as considering them in the risk appetite statement. The nature and materiality of the various risk categories, including insurance risks, credit, market, concentration, operational and liquidity risks, will vary considerably depending on the particular business model and the climate risk exposures of each insurer. So in that environment, the own risk and solvency assessment is a particularly useful tool for insurers to assess the adequacy of their ERM and capital position in light of climate-related risks, and a useful tool for supervisors to understand those matters in detail as well. Supervisors should expect insurers to consider all of the material, physical, transitional and liability risks arising from climate change in the own risk and solvency assessment process, and to take appropriate risk management actions to mitigate the identified risks. So if we can turn to the next slide, which is about investments under ICP 15. And so the paper notes that physical, but especially transition risks, can have complex and non-linear impacts on insurers' investments. And those risks are relevant and must be taken into account regardless of whether the insurer is investing directly in assets or investing via a third-party asset manager or investment advisor. The paper discusses the potential impacts of climate-related financial risks on ALM and concludes that the climate risk can negatively affect the matching of assets and liabilities. And this occurs primarily through transition risk, given that many insurers use longer-term bonds to match liability cash flows, and the value of those bonds can be impacted by climate risk. And so, due to the long-term nature of these risks, insurers should consider the potential that individual firms or sectors of the economy could be significantly impacted over the matching period, and take that into account with when they're constructing investment portfolios. And thinking through also how correlation between different asset classes might change as a result of climate risk is also an important consideration in designing resilient investment portfolios. So a forward-looking view with taking into account both quantitative and qualitative information, as well as the use of stress and scenario testing, can help insurers overcome the potential limitations of historical and market data, and consider how investments may be impacted in different climate scenarios. Particularly here, the use of scenario analysis is relevant, given that the past is not likely to be a sound guide to how these risks might emerge over time. So I'll pause there and pass back over to Emmanuel to talk about the next section. Looks like you're on mute, Emmanuel.
Okay, thank you. Yes, so public disclosures by insurers on emerging or emerged risks, such as the climate change, are of primary relevance to give the policyholders and market participants a clear view on the business activities, risks, and performance and the financial positions of the insurer, which in turn enhances the market discipline. So this is naturally absolutely key. So ICP 20 requires the insurers to provide information on all material risks faced by the company and its management. If climate risks are considered to be material by the insurer, This means that, in particular, from the ICP 20, that all information on these issues must be disclosed. Naturally, the level and type of information that will be disclosed may depend on the nature of the business line. Supervisors that are considering the introduction of mandatory climate risk disclosures may wish to consider a wide range of approaches, recognizing the iterative nature of disclosure processes and early stages of certain aspects of climate risk assessment methodologies. For instance, supervisors may use the Financial Stability Board TCFD framework when designing the best practices or as an input for setting their own supervisory requirements. But this is just an example. The application paper gives many other examples of binding regulation already in place in some jurisdictions, which can be of a source of inspiration. In the European Union, for instance, we made a reference to the very recent disclosure regulation, which has just been adopted at the end of this year and will enter into force in March 2021. This regulation is dedicated to the financial sector and will require financial institutions to disclose two types of information. The first one will be how the financial institution and insurers in particular do take financial climate-related risks into consideration and within their investment activities and the way they manage these risks. And the second aspect is that they will have to disclose information on the way these investment decisions may have an adverse impact on environmental factors. So we have come now to the end of the paper, to the end of each section of the paper. I think that now we have a session for open questions. We will look at the questions with Peter.
So perhaps, Manuel, the first one here that I see is around how important do the panelists see that climate risk is for life insurance companies? And I guess my comment on that would be that people often think about non-life companies as being most heavily impacted by climate risk, particularly they think in the context of natural catastrophes and the impact of a changing climate on the frequency and severity of those type of events. But certainly from my perspective, I think it's very important for life companies as well to consider climate risks, both from a physical risk perspective with the potential impact on mortality and morbidity of policyholders, but also as we talked about in the section on investments and ERM, the life companies typically investing in very long-term assets, and the potential impact of transition risk on the value of those assets can be quite material. So from my perspective, I think important that these risks are taken into account by supervisors of life insurance companies and by life insurance companies as well.
Yes, I do agree naturally with what you said, Peter. I will not say too much. But as you said, in the paper, we will try to give examples of the impacts of different climate risks in the different kinds of, on the different nature of activities and insurance. So we try to be very concrete and look at the different risks posed to different insurance companies. And yes, as you said, there are impacts also for non-life and life insurance companies. This is particularly the case when talking about the life insurance companies. When we looked at the investment activities and naturally the impact that have on this issue, on this activity, the question of the market risk, which is an important factor. So which the climate risk doesn't have an impact.
So we have a couple of questions here on ICP 9 that perhaps I can comment on, and then one after that on ICP 8. Emmanuel, you might take. But so a question on ICP 9 notes that slide 12 refers to supervisors assessing risk to insurers operating in their jurisdiction, and so the question is the intent that supervision should be done solely at the local entity level, or should it be done in a cooperative way at the group level or through the supervisory college? And I think the answer there is that the intention is very much that, as with other types of risks, the sort of group overlay and coordination and consistency is very important here. And so the paper provides some examples of how supervisors can cooperate on the supervision of climate-related risks. There's also likely to be impacts of climate risk on that become relevant in jurisdictional specific contexts, and so I think supervisors both at the individual jurisdiction level, but then also at the group level, need to cooperate and work together on climate risks. And then we have a question as well on ICP 9 about whether it's too early for supervisors to expect insurers to be able to quantify climate risk, and so what's the thought process around quantification? And this issue of quantification is a challenging one across many jurisdictions, and an important work is going on in a range of different forums to think about consistent and comparable scenarios that insurers can draw on, so that we can get better quality and more consistent quantitative assessment of the exposures and the risks. There are challenges to that we've had a lot of discussion about the availability of data to do that sort of analysis is recognised as a challenge, and that's an area for ongoing work. But I think and so there's a recognition, I think, that's a developing area, but it's also the case that this risk is evolving quite rapidly, and so the need for good quality, consistent data, both for the purposes of investors and market participants, but also for the purposes of supervisors, is it's an area that needs to evolve to keep up with the need for those users of the data. Emmanuel, did you want to take this one about ICP 8?
I thought there was also a question on the TCFD recommendation and the TCFD report. The question raised was about the way we consider it as a preferred option or primary disclosure requirements. I would say that in the paper we did not say that the TCFD was our preferred option or something like that, but it's clear that for us it's a strong and important reference. It was an important step, and this was one of the early reference we had when considering the question of disclosure. So yes, for us it's clearly an important reference in the question of the disclosure issues. I would be probably a little bit more cautious by saying that for us this is not absolutely the only one that has to be in our mind. Naturally, this is one of the most preferred references, but this is not the only one. And this is the reason why I mentioned a couple of minutes before the European Union new regulation coming in about the regulation for disclosure for investment firms and insurance companies. So there are many different international regulations around the disclosure, and you have also some standards coming from the industry itself. So we are absolutely aware of the fact that there is a wide variety of references, which is not naturally absolutely the ideal we had in mind previously. But so I would say that companies have to take into account the different standards in place. Notably, this is the case with the TCFD, which is one of the most prominent reference on this issue, but is not the only one.
Just on TCFD, obviously we would also promote the issues paper that was released earlier this year, the joint CIF IAIS issues paper on TCFD in the insurance industry. So we have a question here on our view of whether climate risk is a risk amplifier to existing risks like market risk, credit risk, counterparty risk, etc., or is it an independent risk class? And I think there's different supervisors think about that perhaps differently, and different parties think about it differently. But I think my observation would be that across the CIF members that we spoke to, the more predominant approach is people thinking of climate risk as an amplifier or a modifier of existing risk classes rather than an independent standalone risk.
So there was a question coming in on ICP8 as well. I think, Emmanuel, maybe that was a question for you. So it was related to the fact that climate risk is a risk which may materialize only in the long term. And there was a request for examples on how internal controls could play a role there. Could you please elaborate what kind of internal controls is expected?
Yeah. Perhaps you could show me the question more particularly. I don't have it on the screen. Okay. This is true that yes, this is partly naturally the biggest issue with climate change is that on the short term, this is not absolutely obvious to measure and identify the clear impact on the business activities and the management of companies. So we did some benchmarking exercises to look at the different tools in place. In particular, there is some illustration on what did the different supervisors in their jurisdiction to cope with this. For instance, we made a closer look at the stress testing exercises made in some countries and jurisdictions to see what kind of impact climate change risk may affect the business and risk in the insurance sector. So you can have a look on the paper and look at the different references we made, but we try to be concrete and show in which field, in which area, in which business activities there may be some clear impact, not always in the long run, but rather on the short or middle, rather short or medium term. But Peter, perhaps I don't know if you can have some other.
So there's a question here on whether the paper considers the impact of climate change on the availability of coverage at a reasonable price in regions that are affected by climate change. So the paper doesn't deal with that in any detail, but it is it's a very topical subject that is being discussed by CIF members and at the IAIS. It's clearly these questions of as insurers react to a changing environment, and they reprice the cover to reflect the risks of changing risks of natural catastrophes and such things that can have an impact on access and affordability of insurance in certain regions. And clearly those are issues that are they're not solely for insurers or for insurance supervisors. They're much broader questions. So as I said, not covered in detail in this paper, but is quite an important and topical question. And perhaps just an overarching comment that will hope maybe have helped, but around the scope of the paper. So as I think Emmanuel talked about at the beginning, there's a very wide range of aspects that are potentially relevant considerations given climate risk. And the paper could conceivably cover an extremely wide scope. For the purposes of this first paper in particular, we've tried to deal with some of the really core aspects. That does mean that there are some broader aspects that aren't covered, and we see that some of the questions around some of those broader policy matters are coming through in the chat. It's I think certainly if there are aspects beyond what the paper currently covers that people consider are very important for supervisors to be thinking about, hearing about those in the submissions would be very helpful to help us understand the appetite for further work on some of these broader matters.
There was also, I saw a question about the degree of cooperation we had between supervisors and the way we took into account different kind of initiatives internationally. So I just wanted to say that naturally the SIF and the IAIS are already important networks gathering together many supervisors throughout the whole world. So it's already an international initiative we took, and we naturally try to develop our work within the existing public initiative like the NGFS. So we are absolutely aware of the different works and initiatives taken through the NGFS, and we are absolutely within the same framework by developing this paper, which is like our president and Jeff summarized said in its introductory remarks. This is the first regulatory international initiative that we took with this paper as the internationally setting body for insurance companies.
So we have a question here about how does the paper have guidance on how insurers and regulators should evaluate transition risks to investment positions, given that much of the economy is not green at present. So how do we think through those transition risks? So the paper does try to provide some examples and case studies for how supervisors might think about evaluating the risks in investment portfolios. It's not I wouldn't say a detailed guide for how to do that in all circumstances. That's probably a little bit beyond the scope of this particular paper, but the paper does, as I said, try to provide some helpful guidance for supervisors on how they can conceptualize and assess those risks. There's a further question here about sharing of climate-related data amongst supervisors, and to what extent is their sharing of that data. I think this is Emmanuel has touched on some of these aspects about the cooperation at IAIS and CIF level between supervisors to help understand the impact and exposure to these risks. And we've touched also on the important role of disclosure and other TCFD and similar initiatives in getting some more of that information publicly available, and where it can be sort of contribute to a shared understanding of climate risk. And I think initiatives like the NGFS work that Emmanuel spoke about a few minutes ago are really core to that.
I saw there are some questions around the questions of the deadlines in this paper. How we see the need for supervisors or to fix specific deadlines to put in place the different requirements or expectations we perhaps developed in the paper. Perhaps, as I said in the previous slides, we did not try to set up new standards in this application paper. Rather, we try to give an overview of what did different supervisors in this field, and what are the best practices, and how we try to share these examples and best practices among us. So we did not try to have specific deadlines in the sense that we did not want or expected the different supervisors to ask or to implement those requirements in very specific deadlines. So I mean, the question of the deadline is rather dependent on the different jurisdictions around the table, who are members of the SIS and IAIS. So it is not our role, and it is not the objective of the paper to specify deadlines around the different questions on corporate governance or risk management to have it very on the paper.
There's a perhaps related question here around the expectations about the implementation of this application paper in individual jurisdictions, and I think that's very much as Emmanuel just spoke about. But there's a follow-on part of that question about how can the IAIS and CIF support the effort for consistent implementation, and really that's a key part of why this application paper exists in the first place, is that clearly there is impact on a whole range of different aspects of the operation of insurers and for supervisors on the ICPs from climate risk. And so, the application paper is very much intended to make sure that there's sharing of that information so that supervisors can understand where good practices emerging and take that into account in how they think about the risks. So in that sense, I think it does very much promote consistent application of the ICPs as they relate to climate risk. How are we doing from your perspective, Hannah? Are we
so there
questions?
I can see there is one more question here in the list, and perhaps I take this opportunity to ask all attendees, in case you have any further questions, please share it with us now, and then after that we will probably move on to Connor's remarks. So I see now there are still two questions, but maybe more will be coming. So there's one question on how climate-related risks should be considered into the underwriting models. So that is related to the section on ISP 16.
Yes, and yes, the paper does provide some guidance for supervisors on how they can think about that, building climate risk or assessing how insurers are building climate risk considerations into their underwriting. Clearly, climate risk can have an impact, across a range of different types of insurance, and that's going to be somewhat dependent on the specific nature of the insurance that the particular insurer is underwriting and the risks there. But underwriting approaches should be taking into account all material aspects of the risks that are being underwritten, and clearly climate risk falls into that category. So the expectation would be that climate risks are taken into account in the underwriting approaches, and the paper tries to provide some guidance on how supervisors might look at that aspect within insurers.
Yes, and then perhaps one final question is, how do we see the interlinkages between climate change and broader ESG frameworks?
Did you want to comment on that one, Emmanuel?
To be honest, I think we really try to concentrate our work on the climate change. So we did not really, but Peter, you can say something different if you want. But naturally, we acknowledge the importance of all the ESG factors, including all this question of governance and political issues. So it's broader aspects of the issues, but we really try to concentrate our work on the climate-related risks, which are the core of the risks that are within our mandate. So as a supervisor, the question we have is how to impose concrete requirements towards the insurance we supervise, and how we make sure that the insurance companies are safe and sound and solid to face different crises coming in. So we did not try to approach to have a too large and too broad approach on these issues, which are not the core center of our mandate.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add to that, Emmanuel, is that as you say, this paper, those broader ESG pieces are a little bit outside of the scope, but these are things that the Sustainable Insurance Forum members discuss about the potential impact of broader sustainability questions. And we have a question here about the interaction and the interface between this particular paper and the COP for climate change process, and I think that they're probably quite separate processes, but our the IAIS mandate here that we're writing this paper for is around insurance supervision and protection of policyholders. The COP process is probably a little bit broader than that, and goes to broader approaches to preventing climate risk. So related processes, related objectives, but a bit separate from this process. Although if there's something there that people think we perhaps could draw out more extensively in the paper, that would be good to hear through the submissions, I think. So it looks like we've perhaps reached the end of the questions for now, but I'm sure more questions will come to mind for people as they work their way through the detail of the paper, but which is a good segue, I think, for Connor to talk about the next steps a bit and make his closing remarks. So thank you, and over to you, Connor.
Thank you very much, Peter and Emmanuel, and to Hannah and Jeff as well for your efforts today in organizing this public background session. Big thank you from my behalf, on behalf of the International Association of Insurance Supervisors, for all the stakeholders who have taken the time to join this call today, and for the good questions that were put towards the co-chairs of the drafting group. In 2018, when we published our first paper looking at climate change risk in the insurance sector, we were building a foundation that was actualized in the transition that we outlined in the strategic plan and financial outlook for 2020 to 24. Here, we identified climate change and sustainability as one of the key strategic themes for the IAIS in the coming years. It's safe to say that despite some of the challenges that all of us have experienced in light of COVID-19, our climate change work still remains at the very top of our agenda, and I'm very pleased that the development of this paper will provide a very strong foundation for further work by the IAIS in this area in years to come. I'm very pleased as well to make a quick announcement in terms of our annual conference. Like many organizations, we've transitioned to a virtual annual conference. And on December 4th, there will be a climate change risk management discussion, one of the panels at our virtual annual conference, where we'll be able to discuss some of these issues in a bit more depth in an interactive discussion between panelists on how climate change risk is being managed by the insurance sector and what this means for insurance supervisors. In terms of this specific consultation on this paper, we will be accepting comments until the 12th of January. So hopefully this gives our stakeholder community sufficient time to be able to read the paper, to understand the issues that the paper is looking at, and to provide some thoughtful comments that will assist the drafting team in making further refinements and ultimately leading us towards the publication of the paper. which is anticipated, we hope, for Q1 in 2021. With that, I'd like to extend again my thank you on behalf of the IAIS for everybody who took the time to join in today's call. And a big thank you to the drafting team, and in particular the two co-chairs, Peter Colhagen and Emmanuel Rocher, for their efforts in pulling the paper together. So with that, Hannah, I maybe turn it back over to you if there's any final logistical details that you wanted to highlight. But again, a big thank you for everyone joining today's call and providing your input.
Yes, thank you very much, Connor, for that. And in terms of logistical details, perhaps two things I would like to mention. So first of all, the presentation, the PowerPoint presentation is available on the IAIS website, and the recording will likely be uploaded in the next couple of days. Perhaps I'll turn it back now to Peter or Emmanuel for any final remarks, and then we will close the session. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Hannah. Thanks, Connor. I mean, from my perspective, my only closing remark would be, to thank people for their participation today, and that we very much looking forward to getting many submissions and considering those as we finalise the paper. This is a rapidly evolving area, and we're all within the supervisory community trying to learn from each other, and the engagement and outreach that we can have with the insurance industry is also of critical importance to making sure that we hit the right mark with this paper. Emmanuel, anything you wanted to add there?
Yes, thank you, Peter. No, I just wanted to make a small recommendation for everyone. It's just to participate in the public consultation for this paper to help us improve it and give us your feedback and advice on the way we develop the paper, and if we can make improvements. Naturally, they are most welcome. If we have missed something, or if you find that some issues should have been tackled. So please feel free to use this period of the consultation till mid-January to give us your inputs. So feel free to do this, and thank you so much for your help. Thanks to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, and have a good day or evening. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.